Check, check. Perfect. Thank you very much, and welcome to Winnipeg, Prime Minister Trudeau. We are so excited to have you here today for this conversation. It's great having you in town anytime. Please come back often. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. It's a pleasure to welcome you. Really want to delve into the issues that you've told us over the years that are priority issues for you as business people and as community leaders. And I don't want to take too much time. I would like to delve into those right away. But I will say, as I was reviewing the questions, Prime Minister, that we're going to talk about today, one of the things that really emerged for me was the theme of relationship. We're going to talk about a relationship with Indigenous peoples and leadership and communities. We're going to talk about our relationship with the environment, talk about relationship with some of our international partners. And the relationship we have with new Canadians, business people. And so to that end, I really appreciate that we're able to be here today to connect, to converse, and to build on the relationship we have with you and your government. And with that, maybe I'll open the floor for some opening remarks from you.
Well, no, thank you, Loren, and thank you to everyone from the Chamber for welcoming me here today. Thank you, Jeanette, for your words. I think, actually, first of all, before we even get into it, I want to quickly address the reports of the death of Alexei Navalny in a Russian prison. Alexei Navalny had been an extraordinary fighter for human rights, for democracy, and someone who was standing up for the Russian people, standing up with extraordinary courage for a better future for Russia and for Russians. And we know how much that scares and continues to scare Vladimir Putin. We'll find out more about these reports of his death, but there is no question that he knew that this was always going to be a possibility, and he continued to exhort everyone to continue to fight and to stand up for what is right, to stand up for basic freedoms, to stand up for democracy. And I think on this day, it is a moment to reflect on his courage, on his inspiration for all of us, and double and triple down in our resolve as Canadians and as a country to continue to stand up against Putin, particularly in regards to Ukraine, but stand up for the values and principles we believe in a world that is more challenging and more destabilized than we've seen in a very, very long time. So, we need to recommit ourselves every day to honor the fight that he and so many others who have often given their entire lives to freedom of others. We need to take a moment to reflect on that. Juste pour nos amis des médias, je veux prendre un moment pour qu'on se souvienne de Alexei Navalny et de reconnaître sa lutte, son courage, son engagement envers un monde meilleur pour tous, son patriotisme russe de vouloir un meilleur avenir pour la Russie. Vladimir Poutine a toujours eu profondément peur de lui et de ce qu'il représentait, et c'est sur nous maintenant de continuer à lutter pour l'Ukraine, à lutter contre l'autoritarisme et de lutter pour nos valeurs. But it's a real pleasure to be back here in Winnipeg, particularly at a time where there's something in the air here in Manitoba. I spent yesterday making an announcement around healthcare with Premier Canoe, and I have to say the idea that I could now be working hand in hand with a progressive government like WOBS and a forward-thinking mayor like Scott, like Brian was before him, and the three of us working together for Manitoba, for Winnipeggers, is a breath of fresh air and something really exciting that I know everyone is feeling. Because there's an awful lot to do. We have, as you know, a very, very complicated world right now, at a complicated time where Canadians are facing all sorts of different pressures and worries about what impacts geopolitics, from wars to inflation and interest rates are having on them, to disrupted supply chains, to also concerns about how we're going to get through and build a strong economy for tomorrow that includes everyone, that recognizes the need to shift towards greener, cleaner ways of doing things that aren't just an obligation to protect future generations, but a tremendous opportunity to grow and to do that and so much more in full partnership with Indigenous peoples, which is something that Manitoba and Winnipeg have long led on with such opportunity and vision. I'm glad to see Grand Chief Jerry Daniels here as well. You're a good friend, and we've got lots to do together in the coming years as we have in the past. But there are really, really important things going on here in Manitoba, and I'm really excited to be able to talk with all of you about them, de regarder comment on peut continuer à bâtir un avenir plus optimiste, meilleur pour tous, avec des investissements, avec des appuis pour ceux qui en ont besoin, mais surtout avec de l'opportunité pour tous. I'm really excited about this conversation, so let's get right into it.
Perfect. Thank you very much, and thank you for the comments at the outset. And I think it's very good that that your comments are in Winnipeg, home, of course, of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, and a museum we're very proud of. We're also proud of the Winnipeg Art Gallery. In particular, it's home of Hamiurk, the largest public collection of contemporary Inuit art in the world. We applaud your government and for its role in support of Hamiurk and other measures to move us forward on the path of truth and reconciliation. How have the calls to action shaped what your government has undertaken and what you hope to advance as Prime Minister?
First of all, I got to walk past the completed gallery on my way in, and it is a reflection of the vision and the leadership of the people of the Winnipeg Art Gallery, but also of this town, of this province, that this was a big priority for them, and the federal government was glad to be there to support. And you know, there is an awful lot of work to do on a number of different fronts. And I think understanding that reconciliation is a lot broader than many people think it is. First of all, people think of it as, oh, reconciliation, particularly with the way the calls to action are top of mind in terms of the to-do list that needs to happen. Reconciliation is about government, or governments, and Indigenous peoples. And obviously there's lots to do there. But reconciliation isn't just about that relationship. It's about the relationship that every single Canadian has with Indigenous peoples, and the role that we all have to play in every aspect of our lives to make right on the promises that were broken hundreds of years ago, on the opportunities that were missed, on the partnership that was supposed to be created that simply wasn't. And that's sort of the first part of reconciliation, making sure that we are fully acknowledging the wrongs of the past and working hard to make them right, or at least fix them, or recognize them, or make sure that they're not continually repeated through intergenerational trauma, through lower socioeconomic outcomes, through marginalization and continued challenges. And that's something that is real and is a huge part of reconciliation. And in 2015, when we got elected, it wasn't, us pulling out of a hat, oh, we need to do reconciliation as one of the things we want to do, although, of course, it's been something that's been deeply important to me all my life. My father certainly shaped the way I view this country in that relationship in deep ways. But it was Canadians deciding and making very, very clear that reconciliation mattered, and they voted on that. And it was a thing that actually turned the tides, among other things, in the 2015 election. And that engagement by Canadians is the only way it happens. It can't be one of those things you throw up your hands and say, okay, the government's going to go take care of that, we just elected them. It's something that we do every day. And whether it's the Winnipeg Art Gallery, whether it's all of you looking for ways to engage better, or as Indigenous business owners yourselves, looking at stepping into those leadership roles that we need, this is the path of recognizing the past. The next part of it, though, is understanding the present and the culture, the language, the identity pieces that are woven into that. We talk about residential schools as being horrific, as they were, for trying to convince and effectively convincing generations of young Indigenous kids that their identity had no value, that their language had no value, that their culture had no value, that they had no value. And of course, the trauma that continues because of the impact of residential schools. But let us remember that every other school in Canada at that time was teaching non-Indigenous kids that Indigenous languages had no value, that Indigenous culture had no value, that Indigenous knowledge and traditional understanding of the land and responsibility towards the world had no value as a worldview either. So it's not about just fixing the trauma and the mistakes of residential schools. It's about understanding now as a society, particularly as we're trying to tackle more inclusive economic growth where everyone has an opportunity to succeed, as we're trying to think about environmental consequences and a respect for each other, that folding in to the core of our thinking as society, the principles and tenets and values that have created and grown and led to success in North America for millennia for Indigenous peoples before settlers arrived. It's recognizing and valuing and lifting up that culture and identity that is a huge richness for non-Indigenous Canadians that we need to make sure is suffusing every part of our lives. But it's not just about culture and language, it's also about true partnership in everything we do, particularly in terms of growing the economy. One of the things that we always heard from Stephen Harper and his Conservatives before we got elected, to go back very far, but at the same time we hear the same narrative out of a number of Conservative premiers across the country still, that if we want to get big projects built, we have to ram them through the way a railroad was laid across the prairies 100 years ago. That the consultation process is just preventing anything from getting built. And that's a fundamental misunderstanding of how to build a strong economy in the 21st century. That the work that has been done first in regaining, or starting the process of regaining trust is essential, because that allows us to actually make sure that when we're talking about a resource project, a mine, or a new innovation, or investments in infrastructure, or whatever it is that businesses are starting up, that they be done in a way that includes, that respects, that creates opportunities, deep opportunities for Indigenous partnership and Indigenous success, driven by their communities, led by Indigenous people. Understanding that that's the way of getting big projects built, by building those partnerships as an integral part of reconciliation, that's how we build a strong economy where Canada can deliver the critical minerals, the resources, the energy to the world that the world's going to need, because we have that potential. We just have to make sure we're doing it right. And doing it right means doing it in true partnership with people who have been stewards of this land from time immemorial. And that's what reconciliation is about. So when people, and this is a theme that I suspect is going to come up a few times this morning, when people say, oh, it's either the economy or it's reconciliation, they don't understand that the only way to build a strong economy for the future is to do it in full respect, in full partnership, and in cooperation and collaboration with Indigenous peoples in this country.
Thank you. I'm pleased that you talk about, the opportunity, truth, and reconciliation to realize the vision of Canada fully for all peoples, to be able to seize on the opportunities that makes Canada a destination for so many. So I want to talk a little bit about immigration. In January, your government announced plans to maintain previously set immigration targets of 485,000 in 2024, 500,000 in 2025, and then maintain and stabilize those levels. Further, Canada recently introduced a temporary 2-year cap on new student permits, which will result in the issue of 360,000 permits this year. The distribution of those permits, though, will be based proportional to the size of the population. My question, given that distribution will be proportional and that historically immigration in this country has predominantly concentrated in the 3 large centers, Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, how can your government ensure Canada's immigration strategy is balanced but responsive to regional realities?
Well, I think I think you're selling Winnipeg a little short on this one, because when I think of and I know you're not deliberately, he would never do that. Please let him keep his job.
I love
It's
Winnipeg.
just a rhetorical device
here.
I'm using to get into this answer. No, for me, Winnipeg has actually always been an extraordinary example of successful immigration policies. And to a certain extent, my hometown of Montreal, yes, great cultural diversity, starting with the French and English, and seeing a tremendous vibrancy through immigration of waves coming to Quebec. Toronto, fast on its way to being the most multicultural city in the world, and tremendously diverse and successful because of that. Vancouver, with a tremendous historical Asian immigration. Those are the three places we think about automatically, because they're our largest urban centers, about immigration. But the story of Winnipeg, which is not well enough known by Canadians, of how incredibly successful you've been at drawing people in from around the world and building this great diverse city that is really an example today for so many of that kind of success, is something that, quite frankly, places across the country saying, oh, why would we even try to think about comparing ourselves to Toronto, can learn such lessons from your success here in Winnipeg that we've got to spend a little more time doing that. But on the question of immigration, it's important to remember and sort of realize what's actually happening. Yes, over the past years, we have steadily increased the number of permanent residents that we're accepting as a country. As you mentioned, it's up to 500,000 a year over the coming years. That has been a steady increase that is perfectly in line with what Canada can absorb, what we need to grow our economy, to grow our communities in a way that is successful, as we always have been. That's not where the challenges that people are seeing around housing and other issues are coming around immigration. Because even as last year and this year we're bringing in 450, 460,000 people, we welcomed in about 2 million temporary, or classified as temporary immigrants, either visitor visas, but more temporary work permits for temporary foreign workers, international students, where the numbers have shot up in an astronomical way across the country, particularly Ontario. We've seen a rise in asylum seekers, even as we managed to close Roxham Road by renegotiating the Safe Third Country Agreement with the United States. We're seeing more people arrive through airports. So a lot of the challenges are because things have happened in other areas than the permanent residents that we've welcomed in. And that's why there are very, very clear measures that we're taking. We're in conversations with Mexico about making sure that the number of asylum seekers, some of them supported by organized crime in Mexico, to come up to Canada are reduced. We're taking that measure on international students to make sure, and it's not even about saying, oh, there needs to be enough housing for international students when they show up, although that was a particular problem driving up rents in some communities around Ontario particularly. But we have seen over the past number of years an increase in mental health distress and even suicides in international students who come to Canada, who are squeezed, are with cost of living, are trying to work at the same time, are hoping to maybe become Canadian, and not getting the kind of quality education that they're paying through the nose for, because there are increasing numbers of fake diploma mills that are bringing people in because it's extremely profitable to bring in international students. So our measures on international students are first and foremost about getting the situation under control so that young people we bring in from around the world to give a great education to, so that either they can stay in Canada and contribute if they're kind of jobs that we need, or they can return to their home countries and contribute and succeed to the advancement of the world, that they are properly taken care of. And that wasn't happening adequately, particularly between universities and some provinces. So federal government brings in national plans. We brought in a solution that covers levels across the country, where Ontario, for example, is having to reduce its numbers by close to 50%. Winnipeg and Manitoba will see a little bit of a decline for the next over the next couple of years, but I know that the leadership of people at the University of Manitoba, University of Winnipeg, at the various colleges are working hard to make sure that the success path for those international students and for the communities they are part of remains, because we're going to always need and benefit from tremendous immigration, but the most important responsibility we have as a federal government is to make sure that Canadians themselves remain strong and positive and confident about immigration, because it's one of the huge advantages we have as places around the world are turning away from immigration. We need to show that our capacity to welcome people in and have them succeed and contribute, which is all they want to do, is maintained. And that's why we're making some of those adjustments to make sure we're on stronger footing, because the post-pandemic years led to massive movements that we have to make sure we're keeping under control.
Perfect. I did have a flash forward to tomorrow morning, opening my paper and reading Prime Minister chastises Chamber President for not being part of Winnipeg. So
don't do that, please. He's a very good guy.
Yes. Board members are here, but I love Winnipeg.
It was Chamber President of the Year a few years ago. It's all good.
I want to talk a little bit about being an entrepreneur in this country. A recent report from the Business Development Bank of Canada found that there are 100,000 fewer entrepreneurs today than there were in the year 2000. Yet during that same period of time, Canada's population grew by 10 million people. As Prime Minister, what do you see as driving this trend, and how do you see your government helping to reverse the decline?
Well, I mean, that's a 20-year trend line is something that'll have a lot of factors that academics will look at. But we know that small businesses are such key drivers of our economy, and specifically entrepreneurs are essential, and we need more of it. There's been long reflections on why Canada simply doesn't have the same entrepreneurial spirit in some ways, or is seen to not have the same kinds of entrepreneurial numbers as other places like the United States. But it's actually the contrary, because I see the kinds of innovation, I see the kinds of excitement and ambition, particularly here in the prairies, for people who want to get out there and build their own solutions, build their own businesses. And one of the things we've seen about entrepreneurship that has changed is, entrepreneurs used to be seen as folks who are going in it to, make millions of dollars. That really profits were driven by entrepreneurs, because someone doesn't want to go work for a big company. They're going to make a lot of money as an entrepreneur. And yes, that's still obviously part of the motivation. But for me, the thing that has been most amazing to watch entrepreneurs over the past years has been the focus on solving problems. The focus on seeing, okay, this is an issue that I'm facing. Let me create a solution for it, and because others will want that same solution, I'll be successful. And where we've really seen it is in 3 of the strategies that we put forward, 3 of the big investments and funds we put forward on entrepreneurship, which was our women's entrepreneur strategy, our Black entrepreneurship strategy, and our Indigenous entrepreneurship strategy. Because one of the big barriers to communities facing either marginalization or diverse communities is access to capital. It's easier to access capital if you are an older white man. It is harder if you're not. And the issue of making sure that we are providing access to capital for those groups specific and many more is creating a leverage impact, not just on their communities, but in our economies, of people who have tremendous things to contribute, but haven't been able to break through the systems and barriers that exist through no fault of anyone working in those systems, but we just have a level of systemic discrimination built into all the systems that we have as a country, that unlocking them isn't just about the right or the moral thing to do. It's about making sure that everyone can contribute to solve the problems we're facing, to create those ideas, to create the solutions that will unlock greater prosperity and opportunity for Canada. So as a government, we're always having to make choices about where we're investing, and supporting small business has been a huge priority for us, but specifically supporting entrepreneurs who classically have had more difficulty accessing funds and capital to unlock the leveraging point is massive. Now, on small businesses, we've stepped up in a number of ways, including bringing the small business tax rate down to 9%. A few years ago, we expanded it so that you can stay longer and grow as a small business and still benefit from lower tax breaks for longer, because we don't want our small businesses to just remain small. We want them to be able to grow as well. And brought forward other initiatives as well, that is like in bringing down credit card fees and things like that that are going to make a difference for small businesses. I think the credit cards is saving $1 billion to small businesses across the country over the next 5 years. Like, there's things that we are doing to make sure that Canadians can be entrepreneurs and small business owners and solve those challenges at a community level and grow to be big businesses.
Perfect. We were going to move into Canada-U.S. trade, but before, because you talked about small businesses, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about CEBA, Canada Emergency Business Account. In Manitoba, there were 24,000 businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, that accessed a great program, and I do want to commend you and your government for responding to assist business in our darkest hours, and that does, and honestly, a round of applause for you for the work that you did during the pandemic.
Canadians did the heavy lifting, but well, thank you. Yeah.
Those 24,000 businesses borrowed approximately $1.27 billion. Some reports estimate, the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions estimates that 15% of those businesses that took loans are not going to be able to repay them due to lingering economic hardships. I don't want to necessarily revisit the decision, but just can you speak to where you're at, the decision, but more so moving forward, what can small business expect from you and your government to help?
Well, first of all, and thank you for your words on the pandemic, but we understood right away when this hit that the best way to make sure we'd come out of whatever the pandemic was going to throw at us as quickly as possible and with the best shape possible was to make sure that employees could stay on the payrolls, that businesses could close but hang in there while they needed to and bounce back, because it's way easier to turn back on the lights and give the place a good dusting than it is to rebuild from scratch after something like a pandemic. In Canada, with the CEBA program, but also with the direct support for families and individuals, we made a huge bet that by helping Canadians through that moment, our economy would bounce back faster. And it actually bounced back faster even than the United States. It bounced back faster than most other countries. And we had a less deadly pandemic than anyone else around the country and around the world. So one of the things that we were able to show was actually, government investment to support people through a difficult time is not just the right thing to do morally, it's the smart thing to do financially. And that's a principle that we've had from the very beginning in our investments to support communities and grow the economy from the bottom up and the middle out. When it comes to the CEBA loans, we understand that the recovery from the pandemic, even though it was quick in its initial response, has had lingering consequences. Global inflation, supply chain disruptions leading to interest rate hikes by the Bank of Canada are a real challenge, and we get that, which is why we extended the CEBA loan repayment deadlines. But at one point, we have to look at saying, okay, the emergency, it's right in the name, the emergency of the acute phase of the pandemic is over, and we have to look at other ways of moving forward. Now, the thing is, over 80% of businesses that took out CEBA loans were able to repay it by that final deadline. A number of businesses in that remaining 20% that still have a desire to do so can work with their financial institutions for another month and still benefit from the partial loan forgiveness that everyone else did by paying off at the deadline. And for those who just can't see their way to doing that, they have another 3 years to pay off those loans. So there are measures in place that are going to support it. But the best thing we can do to support small businesses in general across the country is make sure we're solving for the affordability crisis, is making sure we're putting more money in the pockets of families who need it, with things like increasing the Canada Child Benefit in terms of reducing childcare fees that has been a huge squeeze on families for so long, and Manitoba is now at $10 a day. We need more spaces. We need more early childhood educators. That's something I've talked about with Premier Canoe and we're going to work on. We're moving forward on investments that are going to support the community, support businesses, whether it's infrastructure investments, whether it's our fighting against climate change. There's things that we are doing that are creating opportunities for small businesses to succeed. But at one point, the pandemic supports needed to come to a close so we could focus on what we're doing now and next. And like I said, 80% have repaid. That's a pretty good number that we're happy with.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate you addressing. The vast majority of our members are small to medium-sized businesses, but a number of the people in this room have business relationships in the United States. So let's turn south a little bit for a moment. Trump 2.0.
I'd be curious to see which of you in this room have absolutely no connection and no intersection with the United States. Not a single hand went up. Okay.
No,
there we go.
we
go. One or two. There we go.
Okay,
but it's
that's the person that asked me to ask this question. So Trump 2.0 is quickly becoming a possible reality. CUSMA is up for review in 2026. Geopolitical tensions and conflicts are escalating worldwide. What is the federal government's approach to the White House and Congress, regardless of the election outcome, to ensure that Canadian businesses maintain unfettered access to our largest trading partner?
The relationship with the United States is always one of the most important and challenging relationships any Canadian Prime Minister has to navigate. And I'm now on my third president of the United States, and regardless of whether it's Obama or Trump or Biden, the U.S. is very focused, as it has every right to be, on its own interests. So appealing to them by saying, hi, we're Canada, we're friendly, we're nice, please give us a break, doesn't matter whether it's an Obama or a Trump, that doesn't really get you far. That gets you sympathy and a friendly pat on the shoulder. But unless you can make the cold, hard argument that it is against U.S. interests for them to, exclude Canada or punish Canada or put in tariffs or penalties on Canada or reduce Canadian trade, you're not going to get very far regardless of who's in the White House. Fortunately, over the past decades and longer than that, Canada has been an integral and integrated part of not just the joint economy, but of the U.S.'s success. There's the biggest argument I got to make with Donald Trump, who was threatening to rip up NAFTA in those first years, was it'll be devastating for Canada, sure, but it will also hurt the United States. And I remember sitting down with the then governor of Kentucky, for whom Canada is the #1 export destination for Kentucky, and saying, okay, no, you're right, Republican, I'm going to put pressure on the White House to make sure that they're not thickening the border with Canada. And getting people to understand in the United States that Canada is a huge asset for them, integrated into their economy, that they can rely on to be a steady partner in trade, in growth, in opportunities, in furnishing of natural resources, but also building and manufacturing things that work and create North America's success in the world, is the argument that we not will make after November, we're making right now. And one of the things after the successful renegotiation of NAFTA in the Trump years, we are further and more integrated than we have ever been. But it requires vigilance. When President Biden put forward the IRA and measures on electric cars that looked like they were going to exclude Canada, we got to work, we straightened things out, and they've now included the Canadian auto sector in the measures for electric cars in the United States. Like, these are things that we have to be active on. We have to have relations through the government, but it's not just the relations with the government that are essential. That's where all of you come in. I know Manitoba does a lot of trade south with the United States, and that's great, but you need, each and every one of you, not even just after November if something happens or not, but as you engage now, as tensions flare and talks about borders and America First and protectionism in various ways spike up in the United States over the next months, you need to make sure that your friends, your customers, your clients, the people you're engaging with understand all the U.S. jobs that are linked to Canada, all the U.S. growth and opportunities and trade and benefits that come in cold, hard cash from the most successful relationship in geopolitics in history. This is a huge asset of ours, and the biggest challenge is that sometimes Americans don't notice. Like, Canadians, we're always aware of the United States. Americans, they're focused on their own stuff. They're focused on the trouble spots in the world. They don't think of us as automatically as we think of them, and that's where all of us, being part of Team Canada, reminding our U.S. friends, partners, customers, clients, partners, that we are an asset worth protecting, particularly in a world of geopolitical instability and uncertainty. That is going to be incredibly important. So please know that I am deputizing all of you at the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce to be part of Team Canada, and that's what we're going to have to do in thoughtful, careful ways, but in very active ways over the coming months, so that Canada doesn't become either a controversy point in the U.S. election or a target that some people decide to go after.
Your comment about just showing up and saying, hey, we're Canada, we're really nice, and reminds me we did welcome former President Obama to Winnipeg a few years back, and he made the comment about, I don't get Canadians' fascinations with softwood lumber. And you guys show up to, in Washington and you just keep talking about softwood lumber, and we're all like, what's the big deal with softwood lumber? So it speaks to your point, though, about being vigilant, making sure to understand, to talk with Canadian or with our American counterparts to help them understand that integration and so forth.
Okay, let's talk about softwood lumber. Okay? No, because I tell you, 3 presidents, and we'll keep doing this. Americans pay too much for their homes and for construction of houses because they have put tariffs on lumber that they need from Canada to build those homes. Tariffs hurt consumers of those goods. The U.S. doesn't have enough forestry to meet the demand of the U.S. construction industry, and therefore the prices of new homes in Florida, in Arizona, in New York, in California, anywhere across the country are higher than they need to be because wood is more expensive, because they are punishing Canadian wood producers for construction in the United States. It makes no sense. But I have learned that the American lumber lobby is extremely influential in Washington, and the handful of very rich individuals who control the lumber industry in the United States are almost impossible for an American president to push through. I say almost impossible because affordability and housing is a big issue in the United States as well, and I'm going to continue to talk about this because it makes no sense. It is not, oh, be nice to Canada, you should take those tariffs off. It's you are hurting your own citizens and helping your lumber oligarchs make even more profits off of Americans than they should be. And that is something that would seem to me should be fixable. But, you know, we're just going to keep working on it. But yes, that's why we're obsessed with softwood lumber, because it'd be a win-win. Right now, it's a lose-lose.
Well, yeah, no, thank you. We're going to have to bring Obama back and have a conversation. But so I want to talk a little bit about the green economy while we still have some time. And recently, Minister Vandal announced a major Prairies Canada investment in New Flyer Industries to support its contributions to Canada's greenhouse gas reduction targets and net zero emission by 2050. Winnipeg is indeed a green hub led by NFI, Manitoba Hydro, and many others. Yet the federal government is the largest buyer in Canada. 33% of all federal spending is for goods and services, and representing about 13.3% of national GDP. What is your government doing to embrace greater green procurement policies, as have 56 governments worldwide?
Yes, procurement of understanding government. Yes, we can set regulations and targets and shift laws and do all those sorts of things to encourage things. But we're also a very big business that does a lot of procurement, that does a lot of investment, a lot of supporting of small businesses, of different big businesses like New Flyer across the country. And we should be encouraging even more. We have brought in a number of new procurement targets around Indigenous, around green, around various measures, women-owned businesses in various parts of the government. But that's something that we are doing even more on now to make sure we're using that sort of low-hanging fruit method to push things along. Always a careful balance in terms of getting the best value for taxpayer money, but also incentivizing and pushing things in the right direction. But a procurer as large as the federal government should absolutely be part of making that shift. NFI, I know, is facing some of the consequences of American protectionism and the Buy America rules. That is something that we've actually given warning to the United States that we are looking at reciprocal procurement rules. Because the reality is Canada procures a tremendous amount of our municipal services, of our provincial and federal services and goods from U.S. companies. And if we were suddenly to actually act on reciprocal procurement rules, the pushback by American companies that do very well in Canada and serve us well as well would be significant, and that's how we're working on reducing the impact of Buy American here in Canada. But at the same time, there's more to do, whether it's boosting internal trade. Like we have free trade deals with Europe, with more countries around the world than just about any other country. We have free trade deals with 2/3 of the global economy. We're the only G7 country with a free trade deal with every other G7 country. But we have better trade between Canada, easier trade rules between Canada and Europe than we have between one Canadian province and the next Canadian province. That just makes no sense. And it's something that federal government, Dominic LeBlanc in particular, as Intergovernmental Affairs Minister, has tackled. But I'll be honest, successive governments have tackled this over the past decades from the federal level. We have now eliminated just about every single federal responsibility that is putting up barriers between trades. But whether you're talking about a mobility of teachers, so I was a teacher in Vancouver for 5 years. When I moved back home to Quebec, where I'd done all my education, including the first half of my BA, I was told that it would take me about a year of training to be able to qualify to be a teacher in Quebec, even though I was a Quebecer. I'd been a professional teacher for 5 years in BC. And like those kinds of barriers just make no sense, particularly at a time of heightened mobility and labor shortages. You need apparently 3 different first aid kits in your transport truck if you're going to cross from Newfoundland, across the ferry, across Canada to Vancouver, because regulations are different from one province to the next. These kinds of things make no sense. Actually, that was an example from a few years ago. Maybe someone has fixed it since. But those kinds of things are a barrier to Canada actually benefiting from working with each other across the country. And that's something that we're going to continue to push on as well.
Thank you. And of course, beer moving across the country is always an issue. Every time we talk about interprovincial
that's on
trade,
the provinces. That's the first thing they say. Okay, yeah, but alcohol, we're not touching.
Nothing gets Canadians more worked up than when we got restrictions on movement of alcohol.
Talk to your provincial leaders about that. The feds are not responsible for that.
I know our time's drawing to...
But they won't give it up. It's a lot of money.
Our time's drawing to a close here, but I did want to sneak in one quick question because we're here located at the WAG in the heart of our city, downtown. And we know downtowns across Canada are facing stark social and economic challenges amplified by the pandemic. This has led to growing calls for national action, be it from the International Downtown Association Canada or the Canadian Global Cities Council, of which our chamber is a member of. Please describe your thoughts on the state of Canada's downtown and the need for a national urban strategy that promotes downtown investment, social supports, while ensuring public safety.
Just a few weeks ago, the Prairie City mayors were in Ottawa talking about this, and it's something that really, really matters. The downtown should be the heart of the city. It should be the place people come, place people choose to live, people come for an evening in a restaurant, not just come in for a Jets game and go straight back out home, but actually places where people gather, where people meet, where you get that ebullience of ideas, of diversity, of success that then radiates not just outwards from there across the region, but has an impact on the entire country. The pandemic, the hybrid work, the challenges of the opioid and toxic drug overdose, socioeconomic challenges. These are all things that are hitting downtowns rise in crime, are hitting downtowns across the country for a whole bunch of different reasons and factors coming together, which is why, as a federal government, we are stepping up. We're working hard with municipalities on different programs. We've invested $8 million recently in a number of addictions programs here in the city of Winnipeg. We've invested $4.5 million in Winnipeg in safer communities funding to help young people stay out of organized crime and gang and be on better paths and better programs for them. There's so many different things that we can do. There we're looking at gathering initiatives that are understanding the new realm of work, but it all happens in partnership. And being able to work in partnership across orders of government is absolutely essential. And that's really what it comes down to for me. People who step up in politics at all sorts of different levels and look for ways to solve big problems. I mean, one of the great solutions to a problem that we were part of over the past years has been the Southern Chiefs reclaiming of the Hudson's Bay building and moving towards affordable, appropriate housing right in the heart of downtown. Those are the kinds of initiatives that the federal government was glad to be a part of and glad to help fund, but those are initiatives that are driven by community, driven by local actors who say, the downtown matters. It's the heart of our city. Portage and Main, 15 below like it is today. These are the things that, a little BTO song. These are things that actually drive our society and our communities. Downtowns are places where Canadians meet. And, to segue into a slightly larger problem that this is a symptom of, Canadians are not meeting the same way anymore. And that's why I was so impressed with Wob's vision of One Manitoba. The idea that Canadians need to start seeing each other and hearing each other and engaging with each other better than we were before. I mean, we are at a time where the divisions around the world, the divisions pushed by social media, the toxicity of some types of politics are all about trying to drive wedges between people, bring up scary elements that can animate people to distract from the fact that everyone's facing big challenges that we need to meet together. But it's hard to roll up our sleeves and put forward solutions at a time where it's easy to make people scared or divided. And that's, that is the big thing that quite frankly, Manitoba just overcame in the last election, which was a particularly toxic example of the politics of division and nastiness. But it's something that I know Canadians are better than from coast to coast to coast. And in these times, everywhere around the world in democracies, people are facing a choice to make about the kind of country we want to live in, the kind of communities we want to live in, the kind of world we want to live in. Do we spend our time focusing on differences and exacerbating those differences? Do we find the points of disagreement, and in a country as diverse as Canada, and not just in backgrounds, but in points of view and stories, there's always going to be divergences of views and differences of opinion. Do we spend our time exacerbating those differences, amplifying those differences by driving wedges through them, by suscitating anger and frustration? Reflecting it back is a great way of saying, oh yes, I hear how frustrated you are. Let's be frustrated together. But fear, division, anger, not going to solve any of the very real problems we're facing. Doesn't create a single job in a green economy. Doesn't help a kid who's facing existential identity questions every time they look in the mirror from feeling valued and loved in their community. Doesn't help a small business person optimistic about opening a new shop on a downtown street when they don't know how long their plate glass window is going to last because of crime. Amplifying fear and division and picking at those things where we do have differences in our country is not a way of making us stronger. The dirty little secret about politics is it can be a way of getting yourself elected, but it doesn't give you the capacity to then solve those challenges. Because in Canada, we know how to deal with tough times. We know how to face big challenges. We roll up our sleeves, we lean on each other, we do it together. It's what carved this extraordinary city out of some pretty challenging prairie environments. It's what built this country generation after generation. Yes, we're facing tough times right now, but the best thing about Canadians is our optimism and our ambition that is not just about ourselves, but about our neighbors and our community as well. And all around the world, over the coming years, people are going to be facing very clear choices. Do we get mad about the world that it is right now? Or do we start keep working together to build a better world for tomorrow? That's what is exciting, and that's why I am really invigorated by the choice that Manitobans made in the last provincial election, and why I am optimistic when I look at Canadians from coast to coast to coast who, yeah, are rightly upset about the state of the world right now, but remain hopeful, optimistic, and ambitious about the world we can and must build together. And that's why, I am so driven to continue to get out there and be part of this important moment in history that is a bit of a hinge, where it's an inflection point about what kind of future we're building. People get into politics to make a difference. This is one of those moments where the choices we get to make as societies all around the world are going to shape the coming decades and generations. And I know that Canadians are going to meet that moment in the way we always have, with confidence, optimism, and a big smile as we get to work to build a better future. So that was the question about downtown, but thank you, yes.
Great answer. Before I ask you for some concluding remarks, I will say we started...
That was them.
Yeah, well, there's a question actually, and it's for the concluding remarks, but I will say we started talking about today was going to... we practiced this idea that you seek to understand before you seek to be understood. You know, we started talking about truth and reconciliation. Definitely there's a great example of seek to understand before you seek to be understood. Understand the hardships and the pain and suffering that too many Indigenous peoples have encountered. So thank you very much for helping us understand some more of these issues as Prime Minister. You know, I will say growing up, I always wanted to be Prime Minister. I did.
Just give me a few more years, okay, before you make the leap.
And now in this role,
I'll find you a riding here in Winnipeg. I'm happy. We've got a couple of unheld
might
seats.
have a job opening after. No.
You're looking for a job. I'll bring you on.
But just, you know, sitting here, listening to you today, interacting with you, I just want to say, really appreciate the sacrifice, the personal sacrifice that leaders take in taking on these responsibilities. It's, you know, you're constantly under the barrage, and I just want to say thank you very much for every day continuing to lead, and thank you for everyone in this room for continuing to lead as well. Final word to you, Prime Minister.
It's very kind, but I have the best job in the world right now because of all the world leaders. I'm the only one that gets to serve Canadians. And what we have in this country, what we've been able to build over the past generations and centuries, where we are positioned right now to be able to respond to the greatest challenges the world is facing, our freedoms, our successful looking out for each other, our natural resources, the fact that we have the resources in the ground that are what the world needs, but the fact that we overlay that with human resources that are best educated, most innovative, you know, forward-thinking, ambitious, hardworking of any country in the world, and we're continuing to grow. Like, these are advantages that Canada has that any other country in the world would, you know, trade their problems for in a second. Not to say everything's perfect, everything's far from perfect, because Canada, you know, it's a country that's constantly rebuilding and redefining and striving to do more. We're a country that didn't happen by accident and won't continue without constant effort and optimism by everyone involved. But that has been our greatest strength over the past years, and that's why I just have such an extraordinary privilege in being able to serve Canadians and help us, remind us of who we are and where we're going all together, because there's a lot to be optimistic about, even through the challenges we're facing. And I'm looking forward to continuing to build this country every day, starting with today with you. Merci beaucoup.